Today we are going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We are going to take a look a little bit at this story of David and Goliath, and we're going to talk about it in the context of everything that's going on in our lives today and in the world and so on. So I want to talk a little bit about perception, how we perceive things, and I want to talk a little bit about how we approach life in these times. My feeling is that we are going to experience more of the negative side of life here in the next 6 months to a year. I feel that with everything that has happened, we are not going to be able to recover as quickly as we would like to, regardless of who is in the White House. I think that's almost irrelevant at this point. We have a lot of damage that was done in this country this year. And besides Corona and besides 200,000 people that died, and then you have all of the people that struggle financially tremendously, millions. 50+ million people were looking for new work this summer. Country has borrowed tremendous amount of money beyond something that I would even know how to write on a board if you asked me to write 27 or trillion dollars. I don't even know how many zeros that is, you know. So with all of that, and I mean, we are inhaling smoke from California now, all the way from California to the East Coast. There was another hurricane in Florida, besides the one that Milos talked about, that we are going to go help. And it seems like bad news is just coming at us really quickly, and you're faced with it, and you start wondering, how do I deal with this? How do I handle all of this negative stuff? And not only that, but on a personal level, how is it going to affect me? How is it going to affect my finances, my life, my future, my health? I mean, we're all at risk. We are all at risk of contracting the disease, of getting sick, of even dying. You know, everybody's at risk. So you deal with all of these things and you wonder, well, what's next? How am I going to survive? Where am I going to be? So I want to say that a lot of it depends on how we see things, how we perceive things. Perception is something that we all have, and everybody has a little bit of a different perception of things. So for example, on this next picture, if you were to see this as you are climbing the mountain here in Colorado, your perception would be what? Run? Yeah, and so it's a good perception, right? You see one of these things, you know, or a bear or something like that. So we have the perception it's a good thing to perceive danger, for example, and if you perceive it correctly, you can protect yourself. And we're not going to run into lions much in Colorado, but you find yourself on a highway, you're driving 75, 80, and everybody's kind of just pushing that pedal, you know, and you all been there where you say, I'm going to slow down a little bit. I perceive this situation to be a little too dangerous. It's getting a little too out of hand because people are driving faster and faster and faster, and pretty soon you have this train of traffic just going 80, 85 miles down the highway, and at least in my case, I'll sometimes say, okay, I'm going to release that gas pedal a little bit, slow down. I perceive the situation to be a little too dangerous, so I'm going to put the brakes on it. So perception is a good thing. But the problem with the perception is we all perceive things differently, and we all see things differently. So for example, in this next picture, you see Hitler. And when you look at this picture, he's smiling here, and this guy is smiling, and everybody here is smiling, and people are just loving him, you see. And if you were to ask them back then for their opinion, for their perception of this guy, they would have all said, oh yeah, I love this guy. He's the best thing since sliced bread, you know. And there was a lot of people at the time who just had a very positive perception of him and who just loved him. But then you flip to the next picture and you see these Jewish people who are being hauled away from their house by soldiers, you see, soldiers everywhere. And you have these two ladies, look at the expression on their face. They got a little girl with them here. They got their belongings. They don't know what's going to happen to them, but you can see concern. You can see fear. You know, Germans told them that they're just going to go to a work camp and they'll be okay. If you behave and if you work hard, when this is all over, you're going to be released and you're going to be free. They didn't know that they're going to be stripped. The kid was going to be taken away from them, and most of them were not going to survive the next few years. They didn't know that. But you see the tremendous amount of fear in their faces. So you have two different people living in the same country, German citizens, both of them, but one group feels that the guy is just wonderful and they have this great perception of him. Another group feels that he's a monster. And by the end of the war, you know, they had a very horrible opinion of him, and there were still some Germans to this day who think that Hitler was the best thing that's ever happened in that country, you see. On the next example I want to give you, you have Benjamin Netanyahu, a president of Israel. He is considered to be a hero in Israel. He is considered to be a tough leader. He is considered to be a savior. He is considered to be a man who just created peace with some of these Arab countries. And he is considered by many Israelis to be a very positive figure. But if you flip to the next picture and you talk to these people who were forced from their homes, Palestinians, you know, they see him as a war criminal. They see him as somebody who is a bad person all around. So this is how perception works. This is why we have problems in this world. Because I see things one way, you see things another way. And another person sees things, you know, Milos sees things another way. You see, so you find yourself in a position where you go and you try to rent a place for a new church, and the best deal you find is $600 for 2 hours, and he's feeling depressed about it, you see. But why? Because the perception is this is not working. We are trying, but it's not working. And you try to go down to Florida to take this help, or Louisiana, you know, and one obstacle after another, you know, and then everywhere you look, there is problems and there is obstacles, and how do you perceive things? Some people perceive them as huge. I'm not going to be able to overcome this, and other people see it a little differently. And that's the reason why we have conflicts. There is also another point that I want to make here, as Debbie flips to the next slide. You are always a hero in your own story. We perceive ourselves as, you know what I mean? I'm a good guy. I'm a good guy. I try to do good. I'm Pastor Gordon, and I preach sermons, and I visit people in the hospitals, and I try to, you know, so in my story, in my own life, in my own perception, in my own eyes, I'm always a good guy. And you are in your story. But in somebody else's perception, you may be the villain. You know, I mean, let's be honest. When I came to this church, I had arguments and fights with some people who are not here any longer. They left because they didn't like where this church was going under my leadership. And to them, I'm not the hero. I'm a bad guy. You know, and you can be, in your own eyes, you can be a great person, but to somebody else, you may not be. That's how perception works. You see, we look at things and we decide, good or bad. Am I going to like this or am I going to dislike this? And to a large degree, how we perceive things and how we approach life is going to determine how we survive the next year or two in this country, which I think is going to be bad, a bad year. So that's why I went to this story, in 1 Samuel 17, and you can open it with me, and we can look at it for a minute. The Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Soko in Judah and Azek in Ephes Damim. Saul countered with a buildup of forces at Elah Valley, so the Philistines and Israelis faced each other on opposite hills with a valley between them. Let me see which version I'm reading. I'm reading out of the Living Bible, and on the screen you have English Standard Version. Anyways, the setting is every few years these tribes, these kingdoms would fight each other for dominance over the land and for dominance over the resources. And that's why all the wars are fought today. Today they are fought over oil. Back then they were fought over the resources that the land afforded. So they would face each other. One group would stand on one hill, another group would stand on the other hill. Both groups had their leaders, and then they were going to fight. Sometimes, instead of fighting, they would look at each other, and again, perception comes into view here, into play here, and they would decide, well, this year, they definitely have a lot more soldiers than we do, so instead of fighting and going to war, maybe this year we're just going to submit, and we're just going to say, okay, we're going to be paying you taxes for the next few years. And then they agree on all of the terms, and everybody goes home. So this year, they got together. Men came out to war, and they faced each other, and there was a valley in between them. And we face 2021, and now that's coming. We've already faced 2020. There is problems. We kind of expect that things are not going to be good, right? So we prepare as best as we can, just like they did. They prepared. They brought their swords. They brought all of their armor. They prepared the best, but a lot of those guys were hoping, we're going to work things out, we're going to go home. Worst things, if the worst thing happens and we have to fight each other, well, we fought wars before and hopefully we'll win, and then we'll go home. So you look at the bad situation and you kind of evaluate what's going to happen and how you're going to handle it, you see, and then you do your best to handle it. But in this particular case, sometimes things just don't go as planned. Sometimes there is a surprise. Sometimes something happens that just you did not plan on. I mean, in January of this year, we were in Indonesia back in November, and we heard about the swine flu, and we heard about, the different problems that China had, and then December came, and the world realized that there was a virus in China, right? But we didn't think it was going to happen here. And then all of a sudden January comes around, and then all of a sudden you have your first person die in the United States in February, and then, everybody's trying to figure out what's happening. By March, everything is closing down, and churches and businesses and masks and all. I mean, there is a surprise. This is not an ordinary situation anymore. You see, people are losing their jobs. If you're working in a restaurant, or if you were working in a transportation or tourism or airlines, you're losing your job massively. 50+ million people are asking for benefits and for help. So all of a sudden you're dealing with a huge surprise, right? That nobody foresaw. Nobody could figure out exactly that this was going to go this way. You see, next thing you know, you go to the store, you can't buy toilet paper. It's gone. There is none. So what do? You go to a neighbor, can I borrow some toilet paper? I mean, this is what happened. So in this particular story, they face each other, and they are expecting another normal, so to speak, battle. We're going to have another normal year, good and bad. But instead, in verse 4, the Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was a giant of a man, measuring over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, a 200-pound coat of mail, bronze leggings, and carried a bronze javelin several inches thick, tipped with a 25-pound iron spearhead. I can't even lift 25 pounds. You know, try lifting 200 pounds. This guy has an armor on his body that's 200 pounds. I'm doing some repairs on my house and had to buy these special bricks, you know, to fix the chimney. And Milos went and got them, and we got them to the house. They loaded them up over there at the store. When we got them to the house and tried to unload them, it was just about impossible. It took two of us to unload them. Each brick was 100 pounds. 100 pounds. I had a very hard time lifting it by myself. And this guy had a armored plate, you know, armor that was 200 pounds. 9 feet tall. Now imagine that. I mean, you're talking about the tallest of the basketball players that we have now, around 7 foot, 7'2", 7'3", you know. This guy's 9 foot tall. And he comes out to face the Israel army. And this guy looks like a monster. He stood and shouted across to the Israelis. Do you need a whole army to settle this? He's asking them. Let's read it out of ESV version. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, do you come out and line up for a battle? He's almost disrespecting them. You guys, you came to fight me? Am I not the Philistine? So what's he saying? He's saying, I'm better than you. I'm better than you. I have better genetics than you. I'm from better people than you are. I come from a better culture than you do. I'm stronger. I'm more powerful. And you guys come to fight me? Who do you think you are? Am I not the Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Well, why don't you choose a man and have him come down to me, Goliath says, and if he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome and kill him, you will become our subjects. And then he said one other thing. This day, today, I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. This guy is doing this for 40 days, every morning, every evening. So 80 times he comes out and he challenges them. And he says, you guys should fight me. Now, the army of Israel has a guy who is supposed to fight Goliath. And his name is King Saul. The Bible says that King Saul was head and shoulders taller than anybody else in the country. The Bible says when he is trying, later on, when you are reading about him giving his armor to David, it wouldn't fit him. It was, hanging all over David. So David was a lot shorter than Saul. You see, so Saul is this guy, the only guy in Israel who could face Goliath. And he's the king. And it is his job to lead his army. It is his job. That's why God appointed him to be the king, to be the first one in the battle. It's his job. He was chosen for that. And every one of us is chosen for something in this life. You see, every one of us is chosen to do something in this life. Whether you believe it or not, you can look at yourself and say, well, I'm not qualified. Well, I'm not this, I'm not that. Well, every single person in this room was chosen to do something in this life. King Saul was chosen to lead the army of Israel, and he was supposed to come out into the field with his armor and with his training and with his ability. And he was an able soldier too. He was not just some dummy who didn't know how to hold a sword. You see? He had all of the physical attributes. One time I saw a documentary, and two surfer guys on a California beach were fighting each other because somebody crossed somebody's wave the wrong way, and then they went out on the beach and they started punching each other. And a funny thing that I observed, those two guys were about the same height, about the same muscle mass, about the same strength, you couldn't tell difference. They were like twins. But one guy was wailing on the other, and the other guy was basically trying to run away. But he had the same muscles, and I thought to myself, well, what's wrong with you, man? You got the same muscles, turn around and punch him in the face. You're going to let him beat you up right here on the beach? But he did. It was very depressing to watch. So King Saul here is capable. He has the strength. He has the ability. He's the king. You see? And Goliath is challenging them. And on hearing, verse 11, on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were what? Dismayed and terrified. He was terrified. He didn't want to go out there and fight. And you know what I think? I think that maybe God was trying to show all of the Israelites at that point that Saul was not qualified to be a king. Maybe he put him into that situation to demonstrate and to show to the whole nation that he's not qualified to be the king. God did not want him to be the king in the first place. But they insisted, remember? So maybe that's why this whole thing happens. But he's scared. He's scared. Look at this next slide. This is a point that I think we need to understand. A lot of times we don't perceive things the way they really are. We perceive things based on who we are. Saul was a coward. So he perceived Goliath as an impossible task. You see, sometimes you see yourself as a loser, and then every problem becomes unsurmountable. Every hill, every mountain, every peak, it becomes, I can't reach it. And it's not real. The reality is something different. But because of who we are, we see things in the way that we see things. And that's what leads us to failure oftentimes. And to depression, and to misery, and to failed marriages, and to failed finances, and to fail a lot of different things. So the question to ask today is, who am I? Because that will also help you to understand how you perceive things, how you perceive the world. Because as you're going to see here in a second, the same situation, but two totally different perception of that situation. Our perception makes a huge difference in how we see the world around us. And we all see the world differently around us, right? Sometimes we find ourselves in a situation just like Saul and the Israelites, and we say, well, this is not going to get any better. And you say, I'm not going to get to climb out of this hole. This one, I'm not going to be able to overcome. This one is just too much. Lost my job, don't know if I'm going to find another one. We watched a documentary last night about homeless people. And they had one segment in California. They went through the whole country. But this one segment caught my eye. There is this one place, a parking lot, that's fenced off. And the city has put in there a field kitchen and the restroom, and I think one of those field showers. And they allow people to go in there, people who live in their cars and who have a job. If you have a job And if you have a car, you're allowed to go into that parking lot and park there, and you have the use of that kitchen. Everybody does in that parking lot, and the restroom and so on. And at 9 o'clock at night, they lock the gate, and nobody can go in and out anymore until next morning. And then all of those people in those cars, they had jobs. One guy was an IT. One lady was a nurse's assistant. And so on and so on. You had engineers. You had people who just couldn't afford to live in an apartment anymore. One lady says, we got divorced, and my husband kicked me out and said, get out. And next thing I knew, she says I was living in my minivan. So one thing that caught my eye was the different attitudes that some of these people had. This one lady that was living in her minivan, that was a nurse's assistant, they showed a video of her minivan. It was perfect in every way. It was super clean. It had, everything was organized in little boxes, I mean, it was nicer than my bedroom, because I don't take that good of a care like she did, I mean, just organized, clean. And she said, I'm going to get back on my feet one of these days, And you could see the different attitude. And then they would pan the camera over to another car, and there was this one guy, and he was sitting on the front seat, and everything else was piled with junk. Now you look at those two people, and one gave up and is overwhelmed, and another one is still fighting to get on top and to catch some air and to get to the surface, And we find ourselves in these situations where we lose our positivity. And when our approach to life can become, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. So I want to give you a few tips here on how that can change. You got to change your perception. These are called perception shifters. How do you change your perception of life? Same situation, different perception. Number one, attitude. Attitude. Attitude is something that you choose. Attitude determines how high you're going to get. Attitude determines how successful you're going to be. Do you have a defeatist attitude? You see, we're going back to who we are. Do I just say, the world's just going to beat me up and I'm not going to ever be able to recover? Or do you get up in the morning and say, you know what? I'm going to fight today. I'm going to do something. I'm going to change something. I'm alive. I got to do something with my life. So that's the attitude. David, King David, he became king because he deserved it. He comes to see this battle, and he's bringing with him a totally different attitude than everybody else. A totally different attitude. He comes in and he hears Goliath talking and provoking and offending and disrespecting. And David says in verse 26, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Now look at this. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Look at the attitude. Look at all of the things that David is not focused on. He does not focus on 9-foot-tall guy. He is not focused on how big the guy's spear is. He's not thinking about how experienced this killer is. He's not even thinking about he doesn't see any of that stuff. All of the other men, including the king, they saw this imposing figure and they were scared. David sees a guy. He just sees another guy. He sees a loudmouth guy who needs to be taken out. He's not even thinking twice about it. He's not. Why? Why is one group so afraid of the future and another guy comes in and says, let me deal with this? A totally different perception of things. It is because of who David was. He was different than all of these other men. If you're ever in a place of fear, number 2, Debbie, next slide. If you're ever in a place of fear, rather than ignore it and hope that it goes away, shed some light on it. Unpack your fear. Ask yourself, what is the worst thing that could happen to me? What's the worst thing that can happen to us if, for example, the whole country just goes down the toilet in the next 6 months? We can lose our jobs. I can lose my job. They can say, well, church is going to be closed. We got cut down, Money is not coming in. People can massively lose their jobs. Health, there's all kinds of issues there. You're taking a risk all the time. But the question is who you are. The question is, what is your personal experience with God? Look at what David says next in 1 Samuel 17:37. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. When King Saul heard that David was volunteering to go fight this guy, he told the other officers of his, hey, bring that guy to me. I want to talk to him. So David shows up. Saul is, 6'6", and David is just a normal, average-looking guy. And Saul takes one look at him, and he says, you can't do this. You can't do this. You see what Saul is focused on? He looks at Goliath and starts trembling. He's looking at the outside, outward. And he looks at David and he says, come on, give me a break. Why? Why me? Why am I the king here? I'm going to send this kid out there to get slaughtered. And he says, you can't do this. This guy is a professional Navy SEAL, and you milk goats. You see, what are you going to do over there? You're not going to be able to fight. And then David insists, and King Saul says, okay, at least take my sword and my armor, and they try to put it on him, and it doesn't fit because Saul is so much bigger than David. And David finally says, let me be. Let me do my thing. I'm going to do my thing. You do your thing. Two different attitudes towards life. David is a person who has experienced God in his life before. David is a person who's been through a situation where he is walking through the woods and the lion faces him. David was in a situation where he is tending to his sheep and the bear comes out at him. And he survived. And he lived through it. So his experience and his view of the world and his approach to life is totally different than everybody else. Everybody else is scared, and David is actually looking forward to finishing this. So same with us. Everybody on this planet is scared. Everybody is scared. People are scared about who's going to be the new president. People are scared about who's going to be the new justice of the Supreme Court. People are scared about China and America getting into war. People are scared about coronavirus. People are scared about whether or not vaccine is going to be developed. People are scared about their finances and their 401ks. I mean, you name it. People are scared about everything. People are scared about their jobs. I mean, the fear has gripped the planet like never before. Conspiracy theories are flying everywhere. I had a guy come to me yesterday and tell me about a friend of mine tell me that there is a story online that on Monday the meteor is going to hit Southern California, and that NASA and the United States government is already doing drills in preparation for that, and there is this whole conspiracy theory out there. This thing resembles so much 9/11, and we're going to come to basically some major event on Monday, this Monday. And everywhere you look, there is this tremendous amounts of fear and stories. And, God forbid Biden wins, the country is going to fall apart, We're going to have communism. God forbid Trump wins, we're going to have fascism. And people are just scared of every scenario that's out there. And you know what? I think we as Christians, we need to snap out of this mode of thinking. We need to snap out of this whole allowing the media delivery system to just deliver all of this garbage into our minds, and all of this fear, and all of this talking exactly that just never stops. David, he looked at his experience with God, and he knew that was real. My experience with God is real. God saved me from lions. God saved me from bears. God is in my life. So for him, that was the reality. Not what Goliath may do. Not what may happen in November or January. That was not an issue. He was focused on what God did for him. When you find yourself in a situation like that where you become a doubter and where you become negative and when you become, oh, poor me, this is not going to work out, then another way to snap out of it is to realize that we have to be grateful for some things in life. Gratitude. You see? Gratitude. An attitude of gratitude. This is also a great perception shifter. David was grateful to God for salvation and for protection, and he just was so focused on God. You see, it's hard to see negative when we are focusing on the things that we should be thankful for. Yesterday, right here in the parking lot, a friend of mine, and you know him, Donald Pickett, comes by, and he drives in his little car. And Donald has a lot of financial issues and health problems and all kinds of problems. And he's probably watching somewhere online right now, so I hope he doesn't mind if I tell this story. But he comes, to the parking lot, and we are chatting a little bit, and he's always positive, And he pulls out $20 and gives it to me for a trip to Louisiana. And then he tells me a quick little story. He says, I was at the parking lot at the grocery store, and he says, I noticed this guy, older man, was sitting in a wheelchair, and something was definitely wrong with him. He was an older man, so when Donald was done shopping, he and his friend pulled over by this guy and asked him if he needed something. And the guy said, somebody dropped me off here at the grocery store 4 hours ago, and they never came to pick me up. So Donald offered to give him a ride and to take him home, and he did, and got him some food. And I asked Donald to connect this person, this family, with us so we can help a little more. But an interesting thing that Donald says to me was, he says, Pastor Gordon, I looked at this man, and he's an older man, he's a veteran, he's in a wheelchair, and I looked at all of his problems, and I was just so grateful to God for all of the things that he gives me. And I'm thinking, Donald has more problems than most people that I know. But he's grateful to God to be alive and to be here on this earth and to be able to make a difference in the life of that disabled person in a wheelchair. So I'm thinking, if Donald has the ability to do this, with all of his difficulties in life, what am I complaining about? What am I worried about? Well, I should be grateful to God for all of the things that he has put in my life. Even bad things. We lose a loved one. Several of us in this congregation has lost a loved one here in the last year. And several others are going to lose a loved one in the next year. You know, you lose a loved one and you realize that Jesus says, don't worry about those who kill the body. Worry about the one who can kill the soul. And you realize that losing a human, a flesh and body, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. Your loved one, if they were faithful, when Jesus comes, they're going to get the new body. Right? And you have hope, and you have gratitude that God was there with them. Even in those circumstances, there is something to be grateful to God for. So when we find ourselves in a slump, we need to look at what can I be grateful to God for. David was obviously grateful for the opportunity to be in God's use that day. Number 4, show up like a champ. We all have the power to choose our words, to choose our actions, to choose our behaviors, and how we show up in the world, how you approach the world. Do you approach the world as somebody who is always seeing everything negative, like that army? Can you imagine being an army led by a king and you're sitting there on your butt for 40 days and this guy is insulting you and nobody has the guts to do something about it, not a single man? How do you go back to your wife? How do you go back to your kids? How do you be a man after that? Somebody's insulting you, putting you down, and treating you like dirt. And you're taking it. And you're just taking it because you're scared. And you're taking life because you're scared. You're taking the lousy job or whatever the situation may be because you're scared. How do you go back to normal life after that? You go home and you say, hey, honey, I'm home. We were cowards over there. We put our tail between our legs and just sat there. Is that what you do? David wasn't going to live a life like that. He was not going to live. It was not an option for him to act like that. We choose our words, our actions, behaviors, and how we show up in the world. And when we create awareness, we create even more power to choose. You become aware of your situation. This is an important point, to become aware. Because some people just go through life and they just sit there, and they just take it. And I bet there were soldiers there in that army who just sat there and took it, and they've thought in their mind, well, everybody else is doing it, so I'm doing it, so who cares? Let just another day go by, And they were not even aware of the pathetic excuse for soldiers that they have all become. And sometimes we don't realize how pathetic we have become because of this fear and because of this negativity and because of this, I'm just, it is what it is. I can't change it. So David, he finally figured out that there is no talking to Saul because he has nothing intelligent to say. So he picks up his sling and he picks up 5 stones from a creek and he puts them in his pocket and he just goes forward. And he meets this giant of a man, 9 foot tall, with all of the armor and everything else. This guy looks like a tank, And David is over there basically practically naked, going to go fight with this guy. And Goliath sees David and he says, this is a joke? What am I, a dog? You going to hit me with a rock? I mean, can you imagine? He's got armor all over him and David is going to throw rocks at him. And Goliath is practically laughing at him and he's like, you must be nuts. And he's laughing at everybody. Well, you know what happens next. David's attitude David's attitude just basically discounts anything that Goliath has to say. David doesn't care what this guy has to say. He's here for a job. And so David says to him, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. There, my dad is bigger. It's just totally different attitude that David has than everybody else, you see. The God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. He says, enough is enough. You disrespected the wrong person. And he said, and then David says, today I'm going to kill you. I'm going to cut your head off. And that's what happens. That's what happens. He cuts his head off. He hit him with a rock right there in the forehead. This guy was so arrogant, he pulled back his helmet, and he lost his head. And then all of the other guys got up and went and fought with the Philistines, and they won, had a big win. Because of one guy. One guy. I chose 2 quotes from Buckminster Fuller to share with you. Never forget that you're one of a kind. It took one guy. And never forget, no matter how overwhelming life challenges and problems seem to be, that one person can make a difference in the world. They were all sitting passively by until one person made a difference. In fact, it is always because of one person that all the changes that matter in the world come about. So be that one person. I think we are going to have unprecedented opportunity to preach the gospel in the next coming couple 3 years. That's what I think. And I think we as a church should be ready. During the break, Barbara, you know Barbara. I think she's still here in the lobby somewhere. She's right there, okay. Barb comes here with a bus that brings her here every morning. She was here today at 7:30 in the morning. So during the break, she asked me, she says, Pastor Gordon, when I'm standing on the bus station and there are other people there, how do I tell them about God or Bible? And I said to her, well, start the conversation and listen. And if they say something about any kind of a problem that they have, then you offer to pray for them. And then if you pray for them, who knows, maybe they give you their phone number and maybe you connect with them later on. You don't go right there and tell them, hey, you know what, did you know that you need to go to church on Sabbath? No. If you start talking to somebody and they tell you, you know, I have a problem with my back. I have a problem with my kid. He's on drugs. My husband is, or this or that. Well, then, let me pray for you. I'm going to pray for you. People won't know that we care. We're going to have an unprecedented opportunity to preach the gospel and to spread the kingdom. We got to be ready for that. Individually, personally, as a church. The church needs to have stored food and stored money to help people when we need to. And the church needs to go on mission trips. And the church needs to go to Louisiana and Florida and California and Oregon and wherever we may be needed. You see, the church needs to do that. The church needs to go feed the homeless people and provide all of that stuff. But we individually, we need to be that one person like David was. That one person who does not compromise. That one person who does not stand by when the world is falling apart. That one person who does not go along with a crowd who says, oh, there is nothing we can do about this situation. So each one of us needs to be like that. You see, look at this next quote by the same person. We are called to be architects of the future, not its victims. We are called to design our future. We are called to plan our future. I don't care what's going to happen here politically. I care about what we're going to do as a church. How are we going to meet the need of this broken world here in the next 12 months? How are we going to do that? Well, for one, each one of you are going to pray with your neighbors, pray with your friends. Tell them, let them know that you care. You don't need to give them a book. As a matter of fact, I would suggest against it for now. Just build a relationship. Let people know. Maybe they're your kids that are out there and are not spiritual, are not receiving the spiritual food that they need to be receiving. Maybe you start with them and say, honey, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for your marriage. I'm going to pray for the grandkids. We let people know that we care about them. Our neighbors. I have neighbors. Milos knows. My neighbors know that I care for them. And every neighbor that is around me, when I talk to them, I tell them, hey, you ever need anything, you let me know. I don't expect them to be Seventh-day Adventists, but I do expect them to be in heaven. Maybe we'll be neighbors over there. You see? So that's what God is looking for. In conclusion, I want to say this one other thing. Use the dumpster. When Jim was alive and when he was here, we walk through the property and we go up on a balcony or we go into the basement and all of a sudden we are like, what the heck is this stuff doing here? Who brought this? Because over the years people bring all kinds of stuff. They bring furniture and they bring clothes and they bring, building materials and they bring shelves that don't have any legs. You can't put shelves or nothing, And they just donate it to church and just accumulate somewhere. And then we need that space. And, so me and Jim, we developed this saying, a dumpster is our friend. Use the dumpster, Let's get rid of it. And when you get rid of it, then you feel free. Then you have the usable space for something else. What's in your life and my life that needs to be cleared out? What is in our life that no longer serves us? Those guys, they didn't even realize that Saul and his soldiers, they were full of fear in their life. They should have get rid of that fear. They should have been connecting to God like David was. They should have been facing their own lions and bears along the way so that when the battle time came, any one of them could have gone out there and faced Goliath. But they didn't, because they filled their life with junk. Fear of the future, fear of the politicians, financial fear, status quo, things are never going to change. What am I going to do? I'm in this thinking, position, and what am I going to do? Get rid of it. Use the dumpster. Clear it out. Why? So that you can create room for something better. So that you can create room for better attitudes, for better approach to life, for better perception of what life is. Before we become like Jesus, we need to get rid of these other things that are in our life. Jesus, he took radical responsibility for everything in his life. We need to take radical responsibility for our life. We can't just depend on, whoever. The government, the church, some charitable organization. We don't do that. You got to take radical responsibility. Taking radical responsibility means I'm not going to be afraid. David, everybody else, not me. But David was the one that says, I'm going to take the responsibility for this problem. I will. Just like Jesus. So you want to be like Jesus? You want to fill your life with these things that are on the screen right now? You got to get rid of all of that other stuff that fills our lives right now. Christ engages with the most reviled and oppressed people, and we do that in this church, and we're going to continue to do that, and I encourage you to do that in your personal life. But to do that, you got to get rid of fear. Oh, I don't want to get my hands dirty. I don't know if I should do that. If I help this person now, they'll be back at my door all the time. I don't know if I want to do that. Come on. Stop that kind of thinking. We are here advancing the kingdom of God. Feed the hungry, heal the sick. Jesus was humble. Do you know something? Humble people are generally not afraid of much of anything. Pride, by its definition, pride by its nature, invites fear. Because if I'm proud of what I have done, then I'm always afraid somebody's going to come along and say, well, you didn't do so good. Humble people, they got nothing to be afraid of because they're humble in the first place. They're not going to lose nothing. If people talk bad about them, they're already humble. You can't put them down. Jesus was like that. Jesus Christ was a study in humility. Jesus called for peace in this world, and that's what we need to do as a church. We're not here to take sides. We're here to call for peace between people. Peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. And the last point, which I think is the most important one, that David teaches us and that Jesus taught us, eyes on God. If you want to have the correct perception of what's going on in this world, you got to have eyes on God. If you want to have a clear picture of who Goliath really is, you got to have your eyes on God, not on Goliath. And that's what David did. His eyes were on God. His focus was on his personal experience with God. And Goliath, the symbol of all of the problems, that we face in the world, that was not an issue. Because God is always bigger than all of that stuff. I think God is going to bless us here in the next year. I think we're going to do some wonderful things as a church. We're going to preach. We're going to help. We're going to teach. We're going to, Jeff, Milos. I see some other young people here, We're going to try to focus a little more for online delivery of the gospel, Facebook and YouTube and all of that stuff, So we can do this together as a church. But first we got to get rid of fear. So I'm going to pray for you in my personal prayers. I'm going to pray for this church that God removes fear from our hearts. And that God gives us confidence that no matter what comes our way, He's going to handle it with us and for us. So that's my message for today. God bless you and thank you. Amen.